All right, let's talk about working that aviation radio like a pro. Because as a pilot, you already know that communication with air traffic control and other aircraft are essential not only for safe flight, but also compliance with regulations, as well as flat-out efficiency being an aviator. Now, there's a bunch of different types of radio frequencies here, everything from the ATIS, right, the weather and airport information on the radio, to clearance delivery, where you actually get your clearance, specifically in IFR flight, ground control for everything that happens on the surface of an airport, tower control for takeoffs and landings and everything else in the actual airspace. If it's a non-towered airport, you're likely on a CTAF or a Unicom or a multicom frequency talking to the other airplanes. Different TRACONs around the country, those are approach and departure frequencies. Center frequencies, the different air route traffic control centers across the United States. Different flight service stations. There's also flight watch frequencies for weather and other services. And then there's 121.5, also known as GUARD. In reality, any type of emergency would be handled on that frequency to talk to other aircraft or in a potential rescue situation. Now, all those frequencies have this in common. There are these best practices, no matter what kind of radio frequency you're on, who you're talking to. A couple things here that apply across the board. And the first one here is to use standard phraseology as much as possible. I'm talking about all these things that you'll find in the pilot controller glossary of the AIM, the Aeronautical Information Manual. Things like, and this word comes to mind instantly, if I say I'm a beam something, if I tell a family member of mine that I'm a beam something, I'm not sure they're going to know what I'm talking about. But if I'm talking to air traffic control or another pilot, I'm pretty sure they're going to know what a beam means. It's a phrase that we use quite often in aviation. So to be able to use those valuable words, yeah, that's a best practice. But also let's include this. Use plain English on discretion, especially if you're a new pilot. You're trying to figure out how to request something and you know the simple way to ask for it. But your brain is working so hard to say, well, what's the right way? What's the esteemed way to ask for this? It doesn't matter how distinguished you are. However you can get this communication across from you to another airplane or you to air traffic control, do that. Start with that if you're not sure about all the lingo and everything that you'd find in that pilot controller glossary. Number 2 is to use proper phonetics. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, right? It can go down the entire alphabet here. But don't use Adam, Billy, Chuck, dog. You want to come across with all the right phonetics. Don't make a controller guess, and also be able to interpret what they're saying when they give you Quebec, Romeo, Sierra, Tango, on and on. Number 3 here, keep it short. Less on the radio is almost always more, and I mean that. Anytime you can use the least amount of words, other aircraft appreciate it, controllers appreciate it. They talk for a living. They listen for a living. And that airtime, only one person can talk at a time. It's so valuable. So get off, or I should say get on and get off as quickly as possible, right? Make it short, make it sweet, and make it have meaning. Another thing, because like I said, only one person can talk at a time on the radio. Otherwise, you're going to get stepped on. Don't step on other pilots or the controller. Now, a lot of times people will tune in a brand new frequency and they won't even give it a beat to listen. This is one of the worst areas where you can step on somebody just to dial in a new frequency. Let's say you get handed off to, a different frequency, 123.85, bang, 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 tune it in and just start transmitting. Tune it in, listen for a second, kind of feel the flow of what's already going on. If it's an approach or a departure frequency or a tower frequency or a ground frequency, give it a second and then transmit, right? And also kind of feel the tempo of who's already on the frequency, different conversations. If the pilot and another airplane, if the controller and another airplane are talking, let them finish. Let them get through what they need to before you jump in. Kind of pick your spots here and try not to step on anybody else. Number 5 here in best practices, if you're a student pilot, and maybe you are because you're watching this, and the situation dictates it, identify yourself as a student pilot. If you really need help, don't try and play it off as if you have all this experience and you'll get yourself out of this. Don't be embarrassed to share that you're a student pilot. As an instructor, I would tell any student that I would sign off, especially going on a cross country. They're going to talk to different towers or maybe approach or departure to get a little, flight following, it's okay to tell everybody that you're a student pilot. I'm not saying they're going to hold your hand the entire way, but they're going to watch out for you differently. And they're also going to help you out of rough situations instantly instead of assuming that you're already licensed and you've got a bunch of flying experience. Number 6 here on best practices, know when, where, and how to use the term unable, right? And this kind of goes to some other points that I'm going to make here in a second. Controllers are not all pilots. They don't know what you're capable of, what you're not. If you can't do something, don't agree to it. Instantly say unable, and you can work something else out. All right, number 7 here, it's the 4 W's on initial contact. So let's say I'm coming back home into Livermore Airport in Northern California, and I haven't been talking to anybody else. I didn't get handed off from NorCal approach to the airport. I'm just initially calling up. I've already picked up the ATIS. So the initial call up, I can do it in 5 or 6 words. Livermore Tower, that's who are you calling? Who are you? Let's say I'm Cessna 1234 Alpha. Where are you? I'm over the Altamont Pass, which is a common check-in point. And what do you want? Full stop landing 25 right. Because I know that's the runway in use. I've already checked the ATIS. So look how fast I can do this in real time. Livermore Tower, Cessna 1234 Alpha, Altamont Pass with information Bravo, full stop 25 right. That's your initial call-up. Look how fast I did that. 7 seconds maybe? Sometimes you'll hear a less experienced pilot take a good 25, 30 seconds to get all that out. And that's the difference, right? You're trying to be brief, concise. You're trying to be, professional on the radio. 3 R's in terms of the typical radio communications that you're going to have with air traffic control. Maybe a request that you're making of them or one that they're making of you. There's a readback, which is critical to altitudes, headings, holding short instructions. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then responses, right? Like you have to respond to some things. So those 3 R's are basically summing up all the different types of communications you could have with ATC. And to dive into this just a little bit deeper, in terms of requests and readbacks and responses, things you should do. Number 1, acknowledge all communications directed to your call sign. It is the worst thing for a controller when they're trying to get to you. Cessna 1234 Alpha, turn right heading 090. Silence. And let's say I'm distracted. I'm flying, I'm playing with ForeFlight, or I've got music on and I'm not responding. Cessna 1234 Alpha, NorCal approach. Or I should say NorCal approach, Cessna 1234. No, they're saying it to me. That's right. Cessna 1234 Alpha, NorCal approach. 1234 Alpha, NorCal approach. And where am I? I'm just not there. Acknowledge everything. You need to have your ears tuned in to your call sign. And a lot of times it helps if they identify you if you're a 172. Skyhawk 1234 Alpha. Oh, my ears perked up as soon as I heard anything Skyhawk. But what if it was 5678 Bravo? Doesn't matter. At least my ears perked up to Skyhawk. Always pay attention for the call sign of the airplane you're in. You don't want to miss a call. Let's just say that. Number 2 is to read back all those essential requests, right? So if you get a new altitude you're assigned to, a heading, a clearance, like I said, a hold short instruction, you got to read it back, right? They're not just giving you that for you to say, Roger or Wilco. If you're given, especially in the IFR environment, turn right heading 090, maintain 3000. I want to come back with 090 and 3000 for 1234 Alpha, right? Every single time. If they're giving you information, you have to read it back just to make sure that there's no miscommunication. And speaking of that, clarify any confusion immediately. If you're given something that you're not certain of, or even if it doesn't sink in 30 seconds later, instantly go back. Don't assume anything if it's not clear. Communication is free. Wouldn't it be a shame if you didn't use it to your advantage and instead something terrible happened because you weren't sure about it? And then number 4 here, comply with all ATC instructions unless you have an emergency or there's a traffic situation that or a terrain situation that dictates you don't follow their instructions. Ultimately, you're the PIC. You're the pilot in command. But at the same respect, until you break away, until you call your own shots, until you have to change the course of what you're doing for safety's sake, follow all instructions to the best of your ability. All right. So, but also know that if you need to break away and you need to do something, you can. You're the PIC. 91-123 in the FARs right there. That'll explain more about it. A pilot can ask for amended instructions at any time. Look, if something else is easier for you, let's say you park on the south side of the airport and runway 25 left is an easier taxi for you. And it's not that big a deal. It's quiet on the radio frequency. It's not that big of an ask. And maybe the tower didn't specifically put you on the right runway for any good reason. They didn't know the left was better for you. Doesn't hurt to ask is always a thing that I believe in, but also sense the situation. There's a lot going on. If there's some type of emergency that the controller's dealing with, just think about the situation before you make a whole bunch of requests, but also know that requests are usually handled with ease when it's possible. And like I said before, not all air traffic controllers are pilots. So they're not exactly certain about everything that's going on in your airplane or with your situation or on your flight. But I should say a lot of them are familiar with what it's like to be the pilot, and some actually are pilots, right? So they not only speak your language, but they understand your experience and your situation sometimes. So just know, again, that not everybody that's on the other side of the radio, on the ground as a controller, they haven't necessarily been the PIC. Not all of them, but some have. And so that's something that everybody should think about and know. Common errors when we get to radio work here. Number one is wrong frequencies, right? So you got handed off to a new frequency, didn't hit the flip-flop button on your radio, and you're still talking on the last frequency expecting to go from the TRACON to center, and you call up and ask for center, and they're like, you're still on the TRACON. Or you're leaving an airport, and you got handed off from tower to departure, and instead of flipping it over, NorCal departure, 1234 Alpha, 1,500 for 5,000. And they say, you're still on tower, right? So that's one of them. Or just getting the wrong frequency, dialing in the wrong frequency. How about this? And this one's actually dangerous. You're flying to a non-towered airport and you think that the CTAF is 122.8. And it's not. You're on a totally different frequency. Everybody else is on 22.8. It's dangerous because they're talking, they're communicating, and here you are thinking, well, nobody's even out here. It's because you were on the totally wrong frequency. So you can see how in some cases it's a small mistake, no big deal, no harm, no foul. But in other cases, right? I mean, to show up to an airport where you think the environment is completely empty, you're trying to paint this picture of where everybody else is at in a busy non-towered airport. You don't hear anybody else. It's because you're on the wrong frequency. Or somebody else is on the wrong frequency. So it's nice to use the radio as a tool to paint a picture of the airport environment, but just know there could be somebody that's not on frequency that should be. Improper procedures or phraseology. This would be interpreting something the wrong way, like cross runway 7 left, and you either don't or you thought it meant cross 7 left and right. So you can see how just flat out misinterpretation can happen there. Failure to acknowledge or comply with ATC radio calls. Like I said, even acknowledging them. It's a big one to miss a call 3 and 4 times over, or you had the radio turned down for 5 minutes because you had to, listen to what your passenger was saying. You can clearly see how that gets out of hand. And then lost communications. It's not so much that a common error is losing communications, but what do you do when you're in the lost comms situation? It's in the AIM 6-4-1 of the proper steps. There's different things, obviously, for VFR and IFR flight. But it's not so much what happens in losing your radios. It's what do you do next? And I'm not going to get into that here in this video, but it's definitely something to be aware of. And I'll conclude with the takeaway of all of this, right? how does the order go for a pilot? Aviate, navigate, and communicate. So in all this radio work that I'm talking about here, communicate is actually the third most important thing. It's the least most important thing of these top three. Flying the plane and navigating, making sure you don't hit anything or anybody else, those are very critical. But I want to say this about the third part. You can often gauge the competency of a pilot by their radio calls alone. I've flown with enough people to know this, that as soon as we do the pre-flight, we hop in the plane, brief everything up, turn the engine on, and as soon as, let's say I'm in the right seat, they're in the left seat, as soon as that person calls ground, calls clearance, calls whatever we need to get started, or makes the calls on the Unicom at a non-towered airport, as soon as they start their radio work, this is before they've even pushed the throttle all the way in. I've got a pretty good sense of what this flight might be like. So what does that tell you? It's not to say that a really good pilot flying the plane with hand-eye coordination, stick and rudder, it's not to say that they're all good on the radio, and it's not to say that if you're really good on the radio that you're also very good handling the airplane. But usually those two things go so very hand in hand.